Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're most pleased to bring you a two-week series from our friends at the University of Idaho, from Moscow, Idaho. I invited our guests to do these programs because of something that's going on within the departments of Anthropology and Sociology that I was very impressed with. A new program is being initiated that is titled the Certificate of Completion in Diversity and Stratification, housed within those departments, along with your baccalaureate degree from the university. If you qualify and go through this particular program, you can also have this certification. First of all, welcome to the program, Dr. John Mihelish, who is an assistant professor at the university in teaching sociology and anthropology with his doctorate from Washington State University. Welcome to our program. We're so pleased to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And I'm equally pleased to have Dr. Debbie Storrs, who is also assistant professor of sociology. She holds her doctorate from the University of Oregon. Dr. Storrs, welcome to the program. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'm pleased you brought along one of your students that's being introduced to this new program, our certification at the University of Idaho. We welcome to the program a senior at the University of Idaho, Laura Van Boegem. And we're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to seeing what you have to say from the student's perspective. And as always, I'm so pleased to have our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, and she shall commence today's questioning.
This is a very interesting sounding certificate program, and so Dr. Mihelish, would you please tell us first how this came about? Whose brainchild was this?
Whose brainchild? But probably it was hatched between Debbie and I. We are involved with diversity-related issues continuously because we teach sociology and anthropology, and many of our classes deal with issues of diversity and cultural variation and lots of different things. So given our general interest specifically, or generally, and given the movement, the commitment of the U of I administration to develop some diversity-related programming, the administration from the top down supports it, faculty and staff on campus support it. We already teach in our department many classes that deal with these issues, and so we thought, well, we can use those classes that we already teach and the material that our students already learn, and maybe combine that with some more applied learning, workshops, perhaps diversity-related service learning or internships, and develop a certificate that is balanced and combines the existing academic stuff with the more applied stuff. But we also felt that we needed to provide a general foundation for the students enrolling in this program. So we did create a new course.
Now, Dr. Storrs, this is a certificate program, and can you explain for our viewers what the difference is between a certificate program and a program that would lead to a particular degree?
The certificate program consists of fewer credits, and so anybody who's already a student at the University of Idaho could get a degree in another discipline and still complete the certificate in diversity and stratification. It's also something that somebody outside of the university, a professional perhaps, who's interested in getting some diversity training, could come back just for the certificate and not get a bachelor's degree, for example. So the certificate has fewer credits, and it's a very intense study, both the applied component and the theoretical academic component, so it's a nice mixture.
And Lori, as a student, why did you enroll in the classes, or why do you think you might be interested in one of these certificates?
As a student, I think one of the largest challenges is really bridging that gap between academia and the real world. And I really feel that this certificate and the classes that you have to take to complete it give you the academic basis that you need to kind of understand these issues and critically examine them, but also the component of having to take the workshops and have that practical application is really important.
So you're enjoying yourself so far?
Yes, very much.
Now, I just want to clarify, too, for our viewers, we're talking about diversity and stratification. Diversity, let's define that term, and either one of you can jump in here and define that term.
A lot of people have asked about the title of the certificate. Why is it not just a certificate in diversity? And it's named such because it's because of our theoretical understanding about diversity and how this often leads to stratification. But did you want to talk a little bit about how we
and then define for me stratification too?
Sure.
Okay.
Diversity, as we understand it, I think, and I'll speak for generally, and you can jump in at any time. But as we understand it, diversity is a term that kind of brings out or points to or directs us towards the variation within our society and within the world, really. And so we are trying to take that broad perspective. There's lots of lines which diversity falls. The classic lines of race, class, and gender that sociology talks about all the time. The great cultural diversity that anthropology tends to focus on, both within the United States and outside the United States and between the United States and other places. Sexual orientation, age, able-bodiedness, all these things I think that fall into this range of diversity within the United States and then, of course, outside the United States. And, of course, individual variation, when you have all these different things, because they play out on the individual level. But when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about this variation along these various lines.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that happens often in institutions is that the definition of diversity is very narrow. And so when institutions talk about diversity, it's typically a code word for racial diversity. And we really wanted to address the multiple forms of diversity that people experience in the wider world, especially in the world of work, that you're going to be interacting with either coworkers or clientele who are different other than just racially different than you are. So we really wanted to have a comprehensive definition of diversity, and certainly the coursework, the introductory courses, and then the more specific upper division courses focuses on different facets of diversity. So diversity was really important for us, but we also wanted to examine closely how difference often is tied to inequalities, how difference is used by those in power, and historically to place certain groups in positions of privilege, which means other groups are in positions of, a situation where they don't have that kind of privilege. And so what we provide that I think a lot of diversity corporate programs don't always provide is this real understanding of what happens in terms of inequality, and once it becomes really a permanent feature of society, that's when we're talking about stratification.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
But we're talking about how we have this variation, and so when we get to the stratification part, we're talking about how that variation is organized and conceptualized culturally within our society, which leads to the inequalities and loss of opportunity for people who fall in some of those categories that aren't as privileged as others. Mm-hmm. And so that's the level we want to integrate into this understanding of difference, which is important, but also understanding of what are the consequences and what are the historical foundations for those consequences, which is one of the things we look at in our classes.
So I hear you saying in relation to stratification that it's part of the institutionalization and structure.
Right.
That also has been controlling it, and what Dr. Storrs had to say about some sections of society being in a much more advantageous position.
Right.
Diversity is something that's of great interest to me and in our work in human rights, and I want to pursue this a little bit further with both our faculty members and our student. Let me give you a statement and get you to react to it, how it fits into your program. And actually, there's two parts to this. The first part is that if you go back and look at this development, which you're in a field that unfortunately is not been around too long, it is really studying many aspects of human rights and diversity and all of those issues in our school system is more recent. It wasn't studied as much in the past, right. But this is good news that you're doing this. So my first question is, we saw at the higher education level some years ago the incorporation of multiculturalism. And now we hear terms such as diversity and stratification. I think I know where you'll go with this, but I'd ask our faculty first of all, isn't what you're doing in diversity and stratification much broader than multiculturalism for an analysis in courses and in curricula?
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to take that
Go
one
ahead.
on? Okay. Well, one of the things that I've been trying to emphasize with my students in this introduction course is the different kinds of diversity education that exist out there, and both are valuable in their own right. And I think the move towards multicultural education is similar to what I think is happening even today in corporate America, where there's this focus of, let me understand my culture, you understand your culture, and so when we come together and our cultures are different, how can we interact in ways that diminish conflict? And that's an important piece of information for people. And I think the multicultural movement has focused predominantly on racially and ethnic cultural differences, and again has not examined these other forms of diversity that lead to stratification. So that's one aspect of diversity education. And the other one is really looking at how does it get played out, not just in terms of when we interact on a one-to-one basis, but what you were talking about earlier, how does it get institutionalized? And the earlier forms of multicultural education, in my opinion, didn't really examine that level of stratification or institutionalization. Would you agree with me?
I would, and I would say that I don't want to leave the impression at all that multiculturalism is not important. It's really essential.
It's very important.
It's just absolutely essential. And racism has been one of the greatest problems of the human race. And so that needs to continue, obviously, in its analysis. But you're adding to that, like, it's like an addendum or an amendment to the process, because there are groups in society and also organizational structure that is in other areas that was not identified, and it wasn't even the purpose of multiculturalism to identify that. But you're doing that with this process.
And that historical, one of the things you look at is how different cultures have developed, and the history of that, and the history of segregating people into different groups and valuing them differently and privileging them in different ways. And it's very interesting to understand that process of construction, because then you realize, wow, this whole thing has been created over time.
It's so difficult in the short time we have, even in 2 shows, to get in all the things we want to. I'm obviously very interested in the court process as a political scientist, and I guess one thing that really comes out in your study that has always been of great concern to me in recent years, the U.S. Supreme Court, if I may be able to criticize them, which I think I'm free to do, that in dealing with different groups in society, they have come up with classifications like suspect class and semi-suspect class and class. And what is concerning me about doing that process, there are some types of problems in society, if it gets to court, they'll move quickly on it. Others, you have to have much greater evidence, or they even refuse to take the case. So what I'm trying to say and get your response to it is that through the kinds of courses and programs you're developing, and as this becomes an educational process across the country, maybe will even give the court more courage to address some of the groups and communities that have been really forgotten, while others have been advancing, which is good, but not having enough courage to address the problems inside to the same extent you are. I'm just going to get your reaction to my statement.
Well, can I say something? Sorry. I think the same thing can be said about various institutions, even institutions of higher education, that what we're trying to really do and accomplish is, besides giving our students a really practical, applied sort of skill that they can take to their employer and say, I have some training theoretically and applied, and perhaps be in a better position for being hired. The other thing we're trying to do is really create a culture of diversity where the institution responds not just to racial bias, which is clearly a problem in our nation, but also responds to bias along the lines of sexual orientation, around the issues of age and ability, but not just responds, but is proactive, that we can create a culture of diversity that you can stop situations and reformulate institutions so that there's this real acceptance and there's some real fluidity, rather than this is the way we do things and it only really benefits one group. That's what I would say.
We're seeing it in corporations. I'm very impressed. I'm privy to some information with the new CEO's policy in the board of directors at Safeco Corporation. They're developing a rather remarkable diversity program for their corporation. So I think corporations, in some cases, may be the leaders in the future in dealing with this issue. But let's not forget to ask Lori about the very important role of the student. That's so essential. What are you hearing among students, not only as you're entering this particular program, but the advantage you have of dealing with students across many disciplines and throughout the university and its environment? Speak from the student perspective of what we need to do and what is not yet maybe disseminated throughout the student body. Where are
Can you
students
elaborate
standing?
a
And
little bit more?
where are students standing on all this process? How much are students appreciative of differences at this time?
Mm-hmm. I definitely think that there is an increase in appreciation of differences, but I think it's really important that we don't get really caught up in celebrating differences to the point where we don't really understand how they can either help or hinder. I think it's really important to understand how inequality and privilege works and has been institutionalized, and really to take proactive measures to make change where it needs to happen in issues of inequality. I can speak now particularly on our campus. I think there's a lot of energy and a lot of excitement around particular aspects, certain groups, such as one group that I'm involved in is FLAME, which stands for Feminist-Led Activist Movement to Empower, and really creating and raising awareness about women's issues, gender issues through various events. There's definitely a lot of excitement and activity.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Janelle Berg.
We talked earlier about the fact that this is a certificate program, and there are certain courses that are involved in this program and that will be offered that you can take to lead toward the certificate. And Dr. Storrs, I believe you're teaching a class right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that class, what its title is, and then what it's going to involve this semester?
Sure. It's a Soc and Anthropology 301 class, and it's an introduction to diversity and stratification. So it's a required course if somebody wants to complete the certificate degree, the certificate program. And basically this course is looking again at a broad definition of diversity. So we're looking at many different kinds of social locations, including age and ability, race, ethnicity, etc. And really what we're trying to do is introduce students to different models to understand cultural difference and models to understand how those differences turn into inequalities and get stratified. And so it's a large class with 70 people. I've tried to incorporate some corporate diversity speakers and experts, and then providing students with readings and panels, and then of course my lectures and information about different models to understand inequalities. Hopefully this course will be turned into a web-based course so that it would be accessible for people off campus, but currently it's just being offered every fall at the University of Idaho.
That's the second part I wanted to ask about, so go ahead, Dr. Mihalich.
This course will be turned into a web-based course at some point. It's just a matter of when we can get that done. Because one of the ideas of this program was to, on one hand, we want to offer it to our students. We want to have as many students involved as we can, just for the general purpose of perhaps creating a more humane society. But we also wanted them to be recognized for the kind of learning that they've done. So if they have a certificate, perhaps if the business world or the employer world, state employers, whatever, recognize this and recognize the importance of this kind of understanding in students, then it helps our students be acknowledged for what they've studied, and we think that's important. But the other thing we wanted to do was make this available to people off campus.
Distance learning of
Distance learning of some type. We want to make it as mobile as possible. We want to make it available in North Idaho for professional people or for teachers. We want to make it available in Boise for professional people or teachers, or people who work for state agencies, or people who are involved in civil rights groups and just want to learn something. So the certificate involves at least 2 courses. The 301 course, the Foundations course, and then one more. The 301 course will be online at some point, and hopefully sooner than later. The other course, there's several options. We perhaps could link with Boise State or NIC or whoever and have one of their courses be offered and taken as part of this. We could have a course taught in the summer as an intensive, maybe 2-week thing in Boise, by Debbie or I or both of us or whatever. In Boise and Coeur d'Alene, maybe we'll go to Sun Valley and do it. I don't know. Something that we can get that academic stuff, really do it right, but make it more mobile. And perhaps even an online course with one of our other courses, but we're not sure about that yet.
What are the other kinds of things that you might add to that to study? What other kinds of things might you add to the 301 course? What other kinds of courses?
in terms of the academic requirements, the other courses, all of the other courses that focus on inequality. So, for example, I think Lori's taken a number of these. The Sociology of Gender course would be a complementary course to the intro. The Sociology of Race and Ethnic Relations. We have a North American Indians course taught by Dr. Rodney Fry. What are some of the other courses? Social Stratification.
So those courses that are in general very interesting, just from a perspective of learning to know about why we act as we do.
Right. And what we had hoped is in this introductory 301 course, students just get a little bit of a taste of understanding, for example, racial diversity and inequality. And then if they're interested in that particular facet of diversity, they could choose then to take the more upper division intensive regular course and learn in much more depth about racial inequalities and diversity.
Now, of course, we don't want to forget Lori here. And so I'm going to ask a question that is just kind of a general one. When do you think you first heard the word diversity or began to become aware in your educational process? Was it in grade school? Was it in middle school, junior high, or high school? Or how long ago do you think that was? Or was it the university before you really became tuned into it?
Okay. I really think it's kind of become kind of a buzzword in our culture as far as diversity issues. And so I think the first time I heard the word diversity would probably have been in high school. But honestly, what that meant, I probably really didn't begin to critically take a look and begin exploring diversity issues until I came to the University of Idaho and actually took Debbie's race class was the first.
Okay, thank you.
I want just to identify a couple more courses. You were so kind to send information in advance. In addition to the courses you talked about, I see here that the program requirements recommend 12 or more credits distributed across the academic exploration and the application components. And among those additions, the ones that you've talked about was one dealing with, I guess it's Anthro 462, that deals with human issues and international development. And the course that's intriguing here to me was Communications 432 was Gender and Communications. And then one on conflict management, Communications 331. So in addition to the ones that you've already identified, this really does give the student a wonderful opportunity to have a very broad perspective and look at this whole process. So let me ask the question this way, because some future students hopefully are watching the program, that I'm sure you'll be pleased that they'll be going to the University of Idaho as well as the other fine institutions in our area. I have real affection for all those: Gonzaga and Washington State University, Eastern Washington University, Whitworth College, the list goes on. And of course, North Idaho College would have to be there. But when you're receiving a baccalaureate degree in a particular discipline, maybe it's sociology or anthropology or political science, history, whatever it may be, in most all of those programs there are a number of courses you can take as electives. Right. So what my question is, as they finish their upper division work in their discipline, there would be enough room in electives to take this certification and still graduate on time. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely what we want it to do, is to make it something that students can do as they fulfill other requirements. They can take these academic courses, including the workshops, which are or the applied learning, which are will count as upper division credit.
I want to get to those in a moment, but before I do that, a lot of institutions too do permit students for the baccalaureate degree to have a major and a minor. Right. And so in the future at University of Idaho, as a student might major in political science, for example, when this process is, you're still in the developing stages, but right. Could this certification of completion not become a minor, and where you would join two disciplines together, their major with this being really the minor?
Well, we really wanted to distinguish this from a minor
because
one of the things that we really wanted to do was make it accessible for people who aren't interested in getting a bachelor's degree, for example, but want some sort of higher education credits or certificate in training. But there's a number of those courses that you mentioned and I mentioned that they could take as part of another minor. So really there's no additional requirement on the part of a student who might say major in history and minor in sociology. A lot of those upper division electives could be met And but then the only additional thing they would have to take is these applied credits, which I think is what really makes the certificate program really unique.
But I hear you saying that you could have a major, a minor, and certification all.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
And the idea that this might, I mean, we could keep the certificate program as is, but follow that same philosophy and have an interdisciplinary type of minor, which would be a fascinating, with diversity-focused study. I mean, that's really definite potential.
There's room there for us. You develop it. I don't ask you on this show to come forth and say we've got everything decided for the future, that there's some flexibility. But let's talk for a minute about the workshops, because that becomes part of this too. And I know that you two are very interested in workshops. In fact, I don't want to announce it down this program what's going to happen, but there's going to be a really exciting thing happening, a consortium this spring, and we're going to have workshops among other things. And so that might be something that you would be interested in engaging in that process. But what is the workshop component in this program?
Let me take that.
Yeah.
The workshop component is the applied component. There's a lot of people doing workshops, really excellent workshops that are hands-on kind of thing. That how do we take this difference? How do we get along? How do we solve conflict? How do we understand one another? And that kind of stuff is very hands-on. It's how do we actually deal with this understanding in the real world, in the workplace, which corporate America is very interested in doing and needs to be interested in doing, in our school systems, on our school board, wherever you interact. How do you deal with it? And the workshops, I think, provide ways of thinking and specific skills to help shape those interactions so you can understand one another and also get past any kind of conflict.
So your workshops can address different settings. They could be focusing on the corporation. It could be focusing on government entities like local governments, whatever.
Right.
So there will be those in the future. There'll be those.
Right. We're offering a workshop this fall, and it's going to be taught by L.S. Nickerson at the University of Idaho. It's going to be a one-credit workshop, and the title is something like Conflict Management Among Diverse Populations.
On that note, I have to run the program conclusion, but the good news is you're back next week, and Dr. Storrs, we could pick up on that next time. And
sounds great.
And thank you all three for being here. We so appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we've been doing a program with faculty members and a student from the University of Idaho dealing with the certification or certificate of completion in diversity and stratification. They will be with us again next week when we will continue to delve into this in even more detail, and we certainly invite you to be back again for that program. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.